We're in Luke chapter 4 this morning. It's been a week, hasn't it? One of the things I've learned in 15 years or so of being a pastor is that pastors talk too much. They have too many opinions that they share far too quickly. Yet it's a hard balance to walk. Sometimes the events happen and it feels like this is a time when we need to hear what God has said. But so often in those times, I feel like what you get to hear instead is what I'm saying. And I'm not that much worth listening to on my own. I have many thoughts and opinions, and I believe they're all right. If I thought they were wrong, I would change them. But my thoughts and opinions aren't worth very much. And over the course of time, I have learned to say less and less and less, particularly on social media, about things that happen in the world. And often, what I say to myself, how I justify it, and I think this is correct, is that God has given me one place where I am explicitly called to speak. And it is behind this pulpit here. And He has given me one topic on which I am called to speak, and that is this book and the Christ that it reveals. And so I tend to keep my opinions a little bit quieter than maybe I would have 10 years ago or 5 years ago, because that's the time that I am called by God to speak. It doesn't mean I don't have the opinions. It doesn't mean I don't have thoughts. But I've just learned that sometimes it's better to keep those thoughts as thoughts instead of posts and things that I say. But then I come to a day like today, and I don't feel much better about standing up here and speaking, because it feels like the challenges of this world are so far beyond me that even as I hide behind the Word of God and simply try and say that, it feels like every word is a minefield. It feels like everything you say has to be counterbalanced by also saying the opposite thing at the same time, lest someone think that you are one of those people. And so it is such a heavy weight as I come before you this morning that I simply want to speak what God has said. And so we're not changing our text this morning, even though our thoughts are heavy, our thoughts are directed towards the situation in our world. Our minds recall seeing videos that we did not want to see of someone being murdered. And we feel the weight, we feel the polarization, we feel the anger and the hatred. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you a much better preacher than the one that you have. I'm going to offer you a message that Jesus preaches. Luke chapter 4, verse 14. Jesus returned to Galilee, and the power of the Spirit and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue. As was his custom, he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath and the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. So we have here Jesus preaching a sermon. Jesus' sermon is very short. He reads 2 verses of the Old Testament and says, "This is fulfilled today," and sits down. Maybe that's what I should do this morning. But Jesus opens up the Old Testament to instruct the people, and then he applies it in a striking way. So it gives us some background at the beginning. He's coming from his testing in the wilderness. He's coming from his baptism, and now he is going to Galilee, and he's going around Galilee, and he is doing the work of his ministry. He has probably already started healing and doing the spectacular things that he's going to do in his ministry at this point. Luke doesn't record those events. Nonetheless, based on the response of the region, it seems like he has started in earnest his ministry. That's actually said at the end of his baptism, that he then began to minister. It again doesn't specifically say he's performing miracles and things like that, but based on the response here, it seems like he's begun his miraculous ministry, and everyone is praising him as he teaches in the synagogues. So then he comes to his hometown of Nazareth. Nazareth is a small town. Archaeologists would say that it was probably around 400 people in population. So this is not a metropolis. Everybody knows the carpenter's son. There is not a carpenter row that has many carpenters in a town of 400 people. There's probably one carpenter, and he has a son, and that son, Jesus, is known to everyone. So Jesus comes home, he's done all these amazing things, and he gets up and he preaches his sermon. So first, let's look at the message Jesus preached. Verse number 18. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So here in the sermon, he quotes a portion of the prophecy of Isaiah that Rylan just read for us. He quotes the first 2 verses, or most of the first 2 verses. And he speaks of something that he is bringing. First of all, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me." That's actually a major emphasis of Luke. It talks about Jesus being conceived by the Spirit. It talks about the Spirit coming down on him in his baptism, the Spirit leading him out into the wilderness, the Spirit empowering his preaching in Galilee. And now here he quotes this verse about the Spirit being upon him, a verse that is already manifestly true in the demonstration of his ministry. And then, based on that Spirit empowering messianic work that he has, he says some things that he's going to do. He's going to proclaim good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, freedom for the oppressed, and the year of the Lord's favor. So we have an interesting question here as it talks about him proclaiming these things. Is it talking about a spiritual freedom or a literal freedom? Literal freedom. Is it talking about spiritual healing, or is it talking about literal healing? Now, I would argue for several reasons that it's actually talking and emphasizing the spiritual elements of healing that he brings. Now, there is a physical element of healing that Jesus brings, isn't there? Next week, well, actually 2 weeks, we're going to have someone speaking for us next week. But in a couple weeks, we're going to start looking at Jesus' miracles. He is literally healing. When it says that he cleanses a leper, it doesn't mean that the leper was spiritually cleansed. Or when he makes a lame man walk again, it doesn't mean he spiritually walked again. But there is a greater purpose beyond the physical healing. All of those lame men who walked, blind men who saw, leprous men who were cleansed, sick people who got healthy, all of them are now dead. Every single last one of them is now dead. The healing that Jesus offered, though good, though nice, was not permanent. Ultimately, the illnesses came back. Now, maybe not the exact same illness, but those people eventually died. Not only that, in Nazareth here, there's no recording of him doing any actual physical miracles. Yet he is going to say that today this is being fulfilled in their presence. So he must be talking about something else beyond just physical. On top of that, in Jesus' miraculous ministry on this earth, there are no examples of him freeing prisoners. Now, if we go into Acts, we see Paul and Silas being freed, right? But that's later on. That's after Jesus has ascended back to heaven. And so in his earthly ministry, where he does heal, he does give sight to the blind, he does not actually free prisoners, which I'm sure the officials of the day appreciated, because that would have caused quite the mess if Jesus came to your town and the jails all of a sudden emptied as well as the people being healed. But there is some expectation of something that is coming that is left in what Jesus is doing, that someday there's going to be a greater freedom, a greater healing, and what is happening at this time must be something that has more of a spiritual tint to it. This is good news for us because we need lasting hope, not just a better life. If Jesus only gave us a better life, that would only be good until we died. Yet Jesus is offering something greater. Specifically, as it talks about that this prophecy being fulfilled, it is fulfilled in an action Jesus is taking other than healing. It is fulfilled in Jesus' action of preaching. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim. It's the same word we might translate preach. To preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to preach freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to preach the year of the Lord's favor. He is coming bearing a message, not just bearing miracles. In fact, as we read the description of Jesus' life, there is no point where it says he set out that day to heal the sick. No, he heals the sick as he is going about his ministry of proclamation. As he proclaims, he heals. It is not the opposite. And because it is so spectacular that Jesus heals and so ordinary that Jesus preaches, we tend to emphasize the healing and the miracles because that's not something we see today. You all see preaching today. I can say that with absolute confidence because you're sitting here right now. And so it is much more spectacular to focus on the miracles, but Jesus' ministry is primarily one of proclamation. So Jesus applies this to himself. And he does it as a fulfillment of prophecy. Verse 20, then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. Now that might sound kind of unusual because he's about to start his exposition of the scroll, but this is normal at the time. The teacher would sit down. So he stands up to read the scroll, and he would have had this big old scroll. I don't know if any of you went to the Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit at the Milwaukee Public Museum like 15 years ago. I was in seminary at the time, and we took a class trip to go visit it. It's a big scroll, so you can kind of imagine Jesus gets up. He unrolls it. He finds Isaiah 61. He chooses what text he wants to read. He reads it. He rolls it up. He hands it to the attendant, and then he sits down. And when he sits down, he says, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." He is connecting the Isaiah prophecy to himself. He is preaching that he is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is an interesting book because it combines both prophecies of judgment and prophecies of salvation. In fact, there is such a striking change in the book of Isaiah that some suggest that two different people wrote it. I believe those people are completely wrong because Jesus says Isaiah wrote both sections. He quotes both sections as being from Isaiah. But it is such a gap between the two of them. There is such a change in the tenor of the book as it goes on that some people look at it and say, hey, there can't be someone who's that negative and that positive. But the end of Isaiah proclaims this coming suffering servant who's going to come and he's going to make the wrong things right. He's going to turn the bad into good. He's going to deliver the captives. He's going to do all these wonderful things. And Jesus applies it to himself. Isaiah is about covenant unfaithfulness and covenant restoration. God called his people, and he called them in a special way by making promises to them. And then he develops those promises, and ultimately he gives some promises to Moses. And those promises say, hey, do this, I'll do that. Don't do this, I'll do this. And there's this agreement he makes with the people where he says, do what I tell you and I'll bless you. Don't do what I tell you and I'll curse you. And immediately upon receiving those promises, Israel doesn't do what he tells them. Like one of the first, or the second of the commands that he gives Israel is don't make any graven images. And while he's giving them the command, they're making a cow. Right? That they immediately break the covenant. And that continues on through the entire history of Israel until ultimately you get to the times of the prophets, and the prophets are declaring God's judgment on his people because they have broken his covenant. But there's going to be a time when there's a new covenant, where there's a restoration that comes through one who keeps the covenant perfectly. And Jesus stands up in that sermon and says, it's me. He says, look at me, I am the one. He is the one who's going to restore. He is the one who's going to deal with the rebellious hearts of the people. He is the one who's going to keep the covenant that no one else could and provide a new covenant of blessing for those who believe in him. And that's the message he preaches. But next, let's look at the response that Jesus received. First of all, he receives quite a positive response. Verse 22, all spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son? They asked. Well, that feels good. I know. I feel super awkward when people give positive feedback about my sermons. Like the most awkward moment of my week is someone saying something nice about preaching. I'll just be honest. But it still feels good, even though it's the most awkward moment of the week. Jesus sits down from his sermon, and all spoke well of him. It wasn't like a divided opinion, where like sometimes you'll have someone come up and say, oh man, that was a really good sermon. And then the next person's like, yeah, I really feel like you missed that. And it's a little bit of a mixed feedback. I think that's probably actually pretty normal. Jesus is described as all speaking well of him. People are excited about this good word from the young preacher Jesus. They're excited. Why? Why wouldn't they? Who doesn't want the sick to be healed, the blind to have sight? As long as you think you're the one who's going to be experiencing the healing, that's great news. And so the people are really excited. They're even more excited because this is the hometown boy. This is Jesus. No one knows about Nazareth. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Like, Nazareth is like the Gary, Indiana of Galilee. And they're just like, why? No, nothing good can come from here. This is not a good place. But now we've got this dynamic preacher that everyone wants to listen to. I went to a small college here in Wisconsin. Our college is terrible at sports. I was the play-by-play guy through seminary. I went to the same school for seminary. And part of my job, in order to get my tuition paid for, was to work in the athletic department, and I was the play-by-play commentator, both for live stream and PA for football. And I did that for 2 years. I loved that because I really like sports, but look at me. No one is afraid to see me on the field with them. Like I have gained 30 pounds since I've gotten married. So you can imagine how unintimidating I was 17 years ago. And so when other people dream of making the game-winning shot, I dream of doing the play-by-play commentary of the game-winning shot. And so when I was in seminary, I was able to do that dream. And I was the play-by-play commentator. For 2 years, I called all of the basketball games and all of the football games, except for the one that happened when Haddon was born. And I did not get the privilege of calling a victory in either sport. When I started my second season, I got the roster, and the first thing you do when you get the roster is go to the coaches and figure out how to pronounce all the players' names so you don't embarrass yourself. And I went through the roster and was talking to the sports information director. I'm like, Christopher, there's no quarterback on our roster. Said, yep, that's going to be a problem. We are not good at sports, but there is an exception. The head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide men's college basketball team is a graduate of my college. He was an assistant coach at my college before he moved up the ranks. This is exciting. Like, my college usually has like 100 graduates a year. There's not a lot of us. If you look up our famous alumni on Wikipedia, you've never heard of any of them, so I guess they're not that famous. But Nate Oates, the coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, he's one of ours. I don't like college sports that much, mostly because of my experience with college sports. I don't follow college basketball that much. I generally hate dominant teams, so you know I don't like Alabama. But when it comes time for the NCAA tournament, you know who I'm pulling for? I'm pulling for Alabama, even though it hurts. Why? Because that's my guy. His dad was my history of Baptist theology professor. That makes me really valuable and important because the coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, Dad, taught me about John Smith and Thomas Helvise starting the First Baptist Church in England in 1611. And so I'm very, very proud because he's my guy. I've never actually met him. But we're from the same place. And so we take that pride. So you can imagine that's how Nazareth's going to feel. Look at this super influential guy. He's healing sick people. Well, I'm sick. I don't want to be sick. He's making the poor not poor. Oh, man, I really like that one. He's representing me. We're probably going to get all the perks of being the people who are from his town. Like if he ends up overthrowing the Roman government, then maybe we'll be the capital. Just like if we move the Washington Monument to Gary. Like maybe we'll be the center of the world. This is exciting. But their response is empty. It's positive, but it's not positive for the right reasons. And so, Jesus says, surely you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself, and you will tell me, do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum. Wow, Jesus, quit while you're ahead. They all like the sermon. Why are you following up with the thing to make them mad at you? And he goes on and he talks about what he actually wants as a response. They give him empty acceptance, but what Jesus is looking for is impoverished trust. He says in verse 24, "Truly I say to you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time when the sky was shut for 3.5 years. There was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." So he gives two examples of people who respond properly to his message. The first example is the widow of Zarephath. Now, the widow of Zarephath is poor in all the ways that we think about poverty. She does not have much. She is truly, physically, and financially poor. And that's who Elijah goes to. She's an outsider. She's not someone with much to speak of for herself. And Elijah goes to her. She is an example of the proper response. But then there's another example who's actually quite strikingly different from the ministry of Elisha, and that is Naaman. Now, Naaman is not poor. Naaman is actually incredibly wealthy. When he comes to visit Elisha, he comes with chariots. He comes with the king's blessing. He's an important leader. And so Naaman comes in, and he is not poor, yet his approach has the kind of poverty of spirit that Jesus is going to talk about in the Sermon on the Mount. Naaman comes and says, "I need rescue. You want me to dunk myself 7 times in the Jordan River? I will do that." Doesn't make sense. That river's probably going to make me more dirty, not less dirty. 7 times? Why can't I just do it 6 times or 1 time? But no, Naaman comes, he approaches Elisha, he recognizes that Elisha speaks for the living God, and he does what Elisha tells him to do. And so Jesus, in speaking to the people of Nazareth, who like what they think his message is, says, "You're not actually going to accept it, because you want me on your terms. You want a Messiah who does what you want him to do." And Jesus is a Messiah who does what he wants to do. And so he calls to the people of Nazareth, the ones who would have been insiders of insiders, that knew him from his youngest years, who knew the law. They were gathered at the synagogue, for goodness sakes. These aren't even the bad Nazareth people who don't go to church. They're at church. They're hearing from the scrolls every Saturday. And Jesus comes to those people and says, "You're not going to like what I offer. You think you are, but you're not going to like what I offer. Instead, look at these Gentiles who approach God with nothing and accept from him what he gives to them." And so Jesus tells the people that they are not going to get the Messiah they want. And how do they respond? Verse 28. All the people of the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. And so the people respond to Jesus by seeking to kill him. Now, they're not successful, but it gives us a foretaste of what's going to happen in Jesus' ministry. The people hear the message of Jesus, and they do not like it because it actually says you need to be the poor. You need to be the ones with nothing to offer. You need to be the ones who give up your rights. You need to be the ones who give up your privileges, and they don't like it, and so they seek to kill him. But they're not successful. You see, third, I want us to see the mission that Jesus accomplished. Verse 30, "But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way." This is kind of a strange story. It doesn't include all the details that we might want it to include. Is this literally the only thing that Jesus said? Or was there more to the sermon and Luke's just highlighting the point that he wants to make? Or what happened when Jesus is on the hill. Because notice that the people are forcibly taking him to the hill. They got up and drove him out of the town and took him to the brow of the hill. Now, do you get the sense that the people are like, hey, Jesus, there's a hill. Could you go there, please? No, they're furious. They're angry. It's a mob. They're violent. And so they're dragging Jesus to the hill. This whole time, it seems like Jesus can't stop them, right? He's being forced. He's being dragged to the hill. He's being driven out of town. And he gets up to the edge of the hill. And how does the story end? And then he just walked away. What happened to these people? Like, they can drag him to the hill, and they're up there, and they're like, oh, he's slippery now. Someone coated him with grease. He got super strong all of a sudden. I don't know what happened. But these people were trying to kill Jesus. Jesus isn't opposed to getting killed. He ends up getting killed. But it happens at the right time, according to his plan, and nothing can happen to hinder his mission. The town of 400 people seeking to throw him off a cliff, they cannot succeed. They can get him to the cliff, but they can't get him off the cliff. You see, Jesus has a mission to accomplish. He is going to continue proclaiming his message, and ultimately he is going to die, but just like he expects us to accept him on his terms, he dies on his terms. He will win. And he wins when he defeats death in his resurrection. And he will further win when he comes again and rules as a righteous king who makes the wrong things right, the bad things good, the sick people well, the blind seeing, the deaf hearing, the persecuted delivered. And so Jesus' mission is accomplished. Even though there's still a pregnancy to that mission, there's a waiting for that mission to be accomplished. In the here and now, we don't see that mission fully accomplished, but they couldn't kill him then. And they couldn't keep him killed 3 years later when he was buried in a grave. And his mission is accomplished. And so finally, I want us to close with the invitation that Jesus offers. Accept him for who he is, not who you want him to be. There is a danger at a time when we feel like the world is out of control, when we feel like the world is on fire, when we feel like it is hopeless. There is a danger of running to Jesus, but not running to the Jesus who comes on his terms, but running to the Jesus who we think is going to fix the problems that we see in the world. And he's going to do it now. And he's going to do it the way that I want, through the mechanisms that I desire. And there is a danger at times of crisis that we do some kind of false fleeing towards Christ. Exactly like these people in Nazareth did. Where we say, yeah, I want that. I want earthly power. I want earthly healing. I want earthly deliverance. And so I want to run to Jesus who gives it to me. And I never understand that what Jesus actually wants is for me to come with utter loyalty to him, seeking nothing for myself, but only the praise and glory of the one who created everything. And so today we feel like the world is on fire. We must resist the temptation to come to Jesus for who we want him to be. Instead, we come to Jesus for who he is for us. Now, that prophecy that Jesus applies to himself in Isaiah 61 goes further, and it continues to develop what he brings, what he provides. And in verse number 10, it sums up so much of what the gospel offers to us. It's not just healing, though one day there will be healing. It's not just justice on evildoers, though one day there will be justice on evildoers. It's not just a better, more prosperous life, though one day the lion will lay down with the lamb and the swords will be beaten into plowshares. It is something greater than that. It is something that solves my greatest problem, my deepest need. Verse number 10 of Isaiah 61. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. He has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. The mission that Jesus ultimately accomplishes is so much better than the false missions we want to give him. The missions that give us an easy, happy, healthy life, the missions that make everyone around us do the things that we want them to do, that make governments function the way we think they ought to function, that make the world rotate on its axis the way we think it should rotate on its axis. The thing that Jesus gives is so much better than those things. Yet we are so easily distracted that we look at the world around us and we look at the pain and the suffering and the wrong and the sorrow and we think, I want that fixed. And we miss that what Jesus offers is something so much greater. Jesus takes my wretched, broken, evil heart of flesh that hates him and opposes him, and he covers it with a robe of his righteousness so that I can stand before a holy, righteous, and just God, and he can look on me, and he can love me, and welcome me, and bless me, because he has done this for me. It is the righteousness of Christ for me that clothes me. That is the Jesus we need to accept. And we long for, and I think we rightly long for, the day when Jesus comes and he deals with all the wickedness in the world. This world matters. It will be restored. Good things will happen in this world. It was created to be good, and Jesus is going to come back, and he's going to make it good. But that is something for the future. And we long to bring it to the here and now. Romans says the whole creation groans and travails in the pains of childbirth. But thanks be to God, he has made it so that when that day comes, it's not just until I die, it's for eternity. And so when you look at the desire to fix the world, to see the world made better in this life, right now, remember that even if that happened, you'd still die and you wouldn't get to enjoy it. Yet the promise that Jesus offers is an eternal life, a complete transition of who you are, a transformation of who you are from enemy and to beloved son, from dead to alive and alive for eternity, so that one day when all things are made right, all we will have to do is worship and lift up his name in praise because he has accomplished such great things. And while we are in the in-between, while we are in the time of longing and suffering and sorrow, while we look at the world and rightly mourn and rightly feel anger at evil being done in this world, we look forward and we don't expect everything to get fixed here and now. But we long for the time where we, with the righteousness of Christ, with his robes of righteousness around us, can rejoice and live for eternity in that perfect, restored world that is so absent today. And we need to remember that. This week, it has been hard at times to remember that. It is much easier to be appalled at the things that we see in the world today than it is to be rejoicing about the things to come. And in his infinite wisdom, our Lord, before he was crucified, knew that we would get distracted and forgetful. And so he gave us something to remember him by. At this time, I'll ask our worship team to come forward. We're going to partake of the Lord's Supper together. This reminder of what Christ has done, shedding his blood, giving his body for us, securing for us a robe of righteousness, not our own, a robe of righteousness that belonged to him, that he gave to us so that he could take from us our condemnation. So our worship team is going to be singing, leading us and singing In My place he stood,